My parents kept breaking into my apartment, so I moved without telling them and let them panic. When I got my first apartment, my parents asked for a spare key in case of emergencies. I gave them one, and that's when the problem started. The first sign of trouble was coming home and finding my throw pillows rearranged. Mom had stopped by to drop off some containers I didn't ask for. She said she just wanted to make sure I was settling in okay. I told her to call first next time. She laughed and said, "You're my daughter. I don't need an appointment." A few weeks later, I found my sister's shampoo in my shower. Mom said, "Becca needed somewhere to crash when she was in town. I told her she could use your place since you were at work." No one had asked me. I told Mom this wasn't acceptable. She said I was being selfish. A month after that, I noticed my mail had been opened. Dad said, "I was just checking if anything important came." I sat them down and asked for my key back. Mom started crying and called me paranoid and ungrateful. Dad crossed his arms and said, "We're not giving the key back. We're your parents." So I changed the locks. I called a locksmith the next day and had new deadbolts installed. I didn't give my parents a copy. Problem solved, or so I thought. 2 weeks later, I came home from work and found my mother sitting on my couch. I froze in the doorway. I said, "How did you get in here?" She smiled and held up a key. She said, "I called the landlord and explained I was your mother and needed access in case of emergency." He was very understanding. I was shaking. I said, "You went behind my back to my landlord?" She rolled her eyes. She said, "Don't be dramatic. I'm your mother. I have a right to check on you." I called my landlord that night and told him under no circumstances was he to give anyone access to my apartment. He apologized and said my mother had been very convincing. I thought that would be the end of it. A month later, I came home to find my window screen popped out and my window open. Nothing was stolen, but my laundry had been folded and put away. There was a casserole in my fridge with a note that said, "You're not eating enough. Love, Mom." I called her immediately. I said, "Did you climb through my window?" She said, "The door was locked. What was I supposed to do? I made you dinner and you're yelling at me." I said, "You broke into my apartment." She said, "It's not breaking in when it's family." I called my dad. I said, "Mom broke in through my window. This has to stop." He said, "Your mother worries about you. If you'd just give us a key like a normal daughter, she wouldn't have to do this. You're the one making this difficult." That night, I realized I would never win. I could change every lock, seal every window, and they would find another way in. The only solution was to disappear completely. I found an apartment across town in a building with a doorman and a strict guest policy. I signed the lease without telling anyone. I took a Friday off work without telling my parents. I rented a moving truck and called 2 friends. We had my entire apartment empty by 3 p.m. I cleaned until it looked like no one had ever lived there and turned in my keys that afternoon. For the next 3 days, I answered my parents' texts like nothing had changed. Mom sent me a recipe and I replied with a thumbs up. Then I stopped responding. The second day, my phone blew up. 23 missed calls. The last voicemail from Mom was hysterical. She was saying, "We're at your apartment and it's completely empty. There's nothing here. Where are you?" I waited an hour before calling back. When Mom answered, she was sobbing. She said, "We thought something terrible happened. Your apartment is empty." I kept my voice calm. I said, "Why would you think something terrible happened?" She said, "Because everything is gone." I said, "Why are you at my apartment right now?" The line went quiet. I said, "I moved, but that doesn't answer my question. Why are you there uninvited?" Mom's voice got small. She said, "We were worried. You weren't answering." I said, "So you broke in again." "That's exactly why I left without telling you." Dad grabbed the phone. He said, "We're your parents. We had every right to check on you." I said, "You climbed through my window because I wouldn't let you in. That's not parenting. That's stalking." Dad said, "Fine, give us your new address." I said, "No." He said, "Excuse me?" I said, "You broke into my apartment twice after I changed the locks. You manipulated my landlord. You climbed through my window. I'm not giving you the chance to do any of that again." Mom yelled, "We are your parents!" I said, "And I'm an adult who gets to decide who enters my home. You proved I can't trust you with that information." That was 4 months ago, and they still don't know where I live. I've never slept better.